What if the mysterious figure known as Dhul-Qarnayn holds secrets that could completely change the way we see ancient history? A man who traveled from the far west, where the sun set in a murky sea, to the far east, where people had no shelter from the rising sun. What kind of ruler goes to such lengths, not for conquest, but for a higher purpose? And what if the wall he built to trap Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog, is still standing somewhere today, hidden from the world, yet destined to fall in the end times? Could this be more than just an old story? Could it be a divine mission buried in the pages of the Qur'an, still relevant to the chaos we see around us today? Who was Dhul-Qarnayn? And why did Allah choose to tell his story out of all the kings in history? Let's find out. Dhul-Qarnayn, a name mentioned in the Qur'an that sparks curiosity, debate, and deep reflection. In Surah Al-Kahf, Allah tells us about a powerful and righteous ruler, someone who journeyed to the far corners of the earth, not just with strength, but with divine guidance. But who was he? Why is his story told right alongside other major stories in that surah, like the people of the cave and the story of Musa and Khidr? Unlike other figures in the Qur'an, Dhul-Qarnayn isn't introduced with a lineage or background. There's no mention of his tribe, his nation, or even the time period he lived in. Instead, what we're given are powerful clues, pieces of a much bigger puzzle. He's described as a king with vast power, given authority by Allah himself. A man who traveled great distances, met different civilizations, and made critical decisions that shaped the fate of entire peoples. And through it all, he acted with justice, humility, and faith. What's fascinating is that Dhul-Qarnayn's story didn't just come out of nowhere. According to historical narrations, the Quraysh of Makkah once sent a group to the Jewish scholars of Medina, asking them how to test if Muhammad was truly a prophet. The scholars said, "Ask him about the young men who disappeared, about the man who traveled the earth, and about the soul." That man who traveled the earth was Dhul-Qarnayn. So the story isn't just meant to entertain. It's a divine response, a proof of prophethood, and a lesson packed with spiritual insight. And yet, for all the power and depth of his story, Dhul-Qarnayn remains a mystery. Was he Alexander the Great? Cyrus the Great? Someone else entirely? Why did Allah not name him directly? And what was the real purpose behind his journeys to the ends of the earth? This is where things get really interesting, because Dhul-Qarnayn's story isn't just about the past. It holds lessons for today, about leadership, justice, trust in Allah, and preparing for what's still to come. For centuries, the story of Dhul-Qarnayn has puzzled both scholars and historians alike. Why? Because while the Qur'an gives us a detailed narrative of his travels and actions, it leaves out his name, his origin, and the exact time period he lived in. This mystery has opened the door to countless interpretations, debates, and sometimes serious misconceptions. One of the biggest questions people have is, was Dhul-Qarnayn Alexander the Great? At first glance, it might seem like a fit. Alexander was a powerful conqueror, traveled vast lands, and was often depicted with two horns on his crown, matching the name Dhul-Qarnayn, which literally means the one with two horns. But there's a big problem. Alexander, in historical records, was a polytheist, someone who worshipped multiple gods. That doesn't align with the Qur'an's description of Dhul-Qarnayn as a righteous believer who ruled with Allah's guidance. Others argue He could have been Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, known for his justice and religious tolerance. Cyrus fits better, especially since some ancient coins and inscriptions link him to the imagery of two horns. But even that isn't conclusive. The Quran doesn't confirm any identity. It leaves us with descriptions, not names. And that's where the real challenge lies. Another layer of mystery: the places Dhul-Qarnayn traveled to. The Quran mentions a place where the sun sets, described as a murky, dark sea. Then a place where the sun rises, and people lived with no protection from it. Finally, he reaches a valley between two mountains, where people cry out to him about the threat of Yajuj and Majuj, asking for help. He builds a massive iron wall to hold them back. But where exactly was this wall? Is it still standing today? Was it a literal wall, or symbolic of something deeper? These unanswered questions have sparked centuries of debate. But here's the thing: maybe the Quran isn't asking us to pinpoint a location, but rather to reflect on the meaning. Because behind all the mystery lies a story of power, responsibility, and the timeless struggle between good and evil. The Quran doesn't just tell us that Dhul-Qarnayn was powerful. It tells us how he used that power. Allah says in Surah Al-Kahf, "We established him on earth and gave him a way to everything." Think about that. He wasn't just a ruler with military strength. He was given tools, knowledge, and authority to make a real difference in the world. But what's unique is that he didn't abuse his power. Every decision he made reflected justice, wisdom, and humility. Now some believe that Dhul-Qarnayn's title, the one with two horns, has symbolic meaning. It could represent ruling over both East and West, or mastering both spiritual and worldly knowledge. Others point to historical figures like Cyrus the Great, who was known for wearing a two-horned crown and respected by many for his fair rule. Interestingly, ancient artifacts like the Cyrus cylinder show he allowed religious freedom and protected oppressed communities, just like Dhul-Qarnayn did. Then, there are the places he traveled. First, he reaches the setting place of the sun, where it appears to sink into a dark, muddy sea. This likely symbolizes a western frontier, maybe the Atlantic or Caspian Sea. There, he finds a people, and he chooses to deal with them based on justice, depending on whether they do good or evil. Next, he heads east to a place where people live without any shelter from the sun. Some scholars say this might be a nomadic or primitive tribe, untouched by civilization. But again, Dhul-Qarnayn doesn't dominate them. He observes, he respects, and moves on. Finally, his most famous encounter between two mountains, with a desperate people crying out for help against Yajuj and Majuj. Here, he takes action. He builds a wall so strong, so advanced, that the enemy can't even climb it or pierce it. Iron and molten copper, a true engineering marvel. But Dhul-Qarnayn doesn't take credit. He says, "This is a mercy from my Lord." His story isn't just about traveling lands. It's about navigating moral crossroads guided by Allah. Now we come to the most powerful and defining moment in Dhul-Qarnayn's story. His encounter with a people caught between fear and helplessness. They lived in a valley between two mountains, and they were under constant threat from a terrifying force. Yajuj and Majuj, known in English as Gog and Magog. These were not ordinary enemies. The people begged Dhul-Qarnayn for protection, offering him payment, pleading for someone to save them. And what does he do? He refuses their wealth. He doesn't ask for gold, power, or loyalty. Instead, he asks for something much more valuable: their effort. He says, "Help me with your strength." He involves them in the process, teaching us that protection and peace aren't handed down by kings. They're built by communities who stand together. With their help, he constructs one of the most impressive barriers ever described. Two massive walls of iron, filled and sealed with molten copper, forming a sealed structure that Yajuj and Majuj couldn't climb or dig through. And here's where it hits the heart. After completing this feat, Dhul-Qarnayn doesn't boast. He doesn't celebrate. He simply says, "This is a mercy from my Lord. But when the promise of my Lord comes, he will level it to the ground." That one sentence carries deep wisdom. He understood that no wall lasts forever. No kingdom, no technology, no barrier, no matter how mighty, can stand when Allah's decree comes. His humility in that moment reveals something extraordinary. Dhul-Qarnayn wasn't just building walls. He was building a legacy of trust in Allah. This is the turning point in his story. He reminds us that while we strive to protect and improve the world, we must always know who truly controls it all: Allah. It's not the iron wall that stops the evil. It's Allah's will, and when that divine promise arrives, even the strongest wall will fall, and Yajuj and Majuj will be released. A sign of the approaching day of judgment. This is more than history. It's a wake-up call. So, who was Dhul-Qarnayn? Was he a king like Cyrus the Great? A just ruler who believed in God and protected his people? Was he a figure lost to time? Someone whose real name no longer matters, but whose story still echoes across generations? Or was he simply Allah's servant, guided not by maps or politics, but by purpose, justice, and submission to his Lord? The truth is, we may never fully know his identity. And maybe that's the point, because the Quran doesn't focus on who he was. It focuses on what he did, how he used his power, how he responded to injustice, how he built not just a physical wall, but a moral stand against corruption and evil. How, despite his achievements, he stayed humble, knowing that everything he built, everything he ruled, and everything he overcame was only by Allah's mercy. His story isn't here just to satisfy our curiosity. It's here to teach us how to lead, how to act with integrity, and how to deal with challenges, especially when we're in positions of strength. It reminds us that leadership is a trust, not a trophy. That faith and action must walk hand in hand. And most importantly, that even when we accomplish great things, we must always say, "This is from the mercy of my Lord." Dhul-Qarnayn's journey through strange lands, meeting unfamiliar people, and facing monstrous threats like Yajuj and Majuj isn't just a tale from the past. It's a timeless lesson, a reminder that no matter how far we travel or how much we achieve, we are still under Allah's command. And what truly lasts is not our power, but our taqwa, our sincerity, and our submission to the truth. So next time you hear his name, remember, Dhul-Qarnayn isn't just a character in history. He's a mirror, reflecting what we could become when we walk with purpose, lead with justice, and live with the awareness that Allah is always watching.